Hey guys, welcome to the Erie Side Podcast with your host, Dee,
Sophia,
and Elena.
We appreciate you guys listening, and I hope you're ready to get on the Erie side. Before we begin the show, we would appreciate if you all could give the podcast a follow and make sure the bell notification is turned on so you'll be notified whenever we drop an episode. If you enjoy the show, we would love to have you leave us a review, and if there's a case suggestion or any feedback you'd like to share, feel free to send us a message in the text box below. Share the podcast with family, friends, co-workers, or really anyone you think will enjoy it. Please follow us on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook. I picked this story because when it happened, I was young myself, and for some reason it really affected me. All I can think of is how if you're in the wrong place at the wrong time, your life can drastically change. On December 6th of 1991 at 11:47 p.m., a police officer on patrol reported a fire at the I Can't Believe It's a Yogurt shop in Austin, Texas. So the fire department arrived and extinguished the fire. They just thought it was only a fire. However, when the investigators went inside the store, they made a gruesome discovery that haunts the city to this day. They have found a quadruple homicide. Inside the yogurt shop were the charred bodies of 4 teenage girls ranging from 13 to 17 years old.
Wow.
There were 13-year-old Amy Ayers, 17-year-old Eliza Thomas, 17-year-old Jennifer Harbison, and Jennifer's 15-year-old sister, Sarah. Jennifer and Eliza were the shop employees. That night, Amy and Sarah walked over from a nearby mall to meet up with Jennifer, who was closing the shop with Eliza. They were going to get a ride home with Jennifer after it closed at 11 p.m. I also had heard that Amy was planning on sleeping over at Jennifer's and Sarah's house also. The reason that both of those girls were working at the yogurt shop because they were trying to get money for their expenses, and some of them were trying to buy cars. So they were there because they just needed a little extra money. This is what we know. Approximately 1 hour before closing time, a man who had tried to hustle customers, and I don't know how he was bothering them. I don't know if he was begging or pushing or whatever, was permitted to use a toilet in the back, which took a very long time, and he may have jammed a rear door open, and that was noticeable by the customers. A couple who left the shop just before 11 p.m. said that Jennifer locked the front door to prevent more customers from entering, and reported seeing 2 men at the table acting fruitfully.
what does that mean?
They were acting slew and sly.
Oh, okay.
They weren't acting normal. They even said they really were not acting normal. It brought attention to them. This is what happened. The victims had been shot in the head. At least one of them had been raped. Gunshot wounds showed that 2 different types of guns were used, a .22 and a .380 pistol. The use of 2 different guns also made investigators suspect multiple individuals were involved in robbing the shop and killing the girls. The perpetrators, and I'm going to say it plural because it is really believed to be more than one, probably exited out through the back door that was found unlocked. Investigators found no sign of forced entry. When the firemen came, they knew the front door was locked, and they did find the back door unlocked. That's why they think that they went out the back door. And the people who left did say that Jennifer locked the front door, and that's exactly how they found it. The firefighters discovered 4 nude bodies. The girls had been made to remove all their clothes. They had been gagged with their own underwear and tied with their own clothing. Each had been shot in the head execution style with a .22 caliber lead bullet. Jennifer, Sarah, and Eliza had been severely charred and found in the storeroom, and their nude bodies had been stacked up. Unlike the others, Amy's body was found in a separate part of the shop. She was not charred, but she had received second and very early third-degree burns on 25 to 30% of her body.
So she was not as burned as the rest of them then. Is that correct?
Correct.
She seems like she was singled out maybe.
She was found with a sock-like cloth around her neck from being strangled, but not fatally so. She had been shot the same as the others. However, the first bullet had missed her brain. She also had a second bullet, which had caused severe damage to her brain, exiting through the lateral cheek and jawline, and it was the fatal shot. Her gunshot wounds to the head were made with 2 different caliber pistols. So are you guys on board? Do you have any questions?
So she was shot in the head twice.
Correct. With 2 different bullets, guts.
Which is why they believe that it was
More than one
multiple
person.
people. Yeah. And then as for the other girls, do we know how they were?
They were shot with a .22 caliber.
Okay.
They were the ones shot with only the .22.
Okay, so she was the only one that has a different bullet, right?
Right. She only has one difference. She had a .22,
Right.
then she had .380.
Okay.
And the other thing is they were all killed execution style.
Although Amy seems to have had some sort of strangulation, whether that was just for fun or they tried to kill her. It did not end up killing her. But
She
tried.
was not only one with ligatures.
Okay.
I'll continue and you'll see. The slugs were badly damaged, making it impossible for investigators to tell if they all had come from the same weapon. They found a ligature around Jennifer Harbison's neck, and the killer or killers, and I'm going to go from here on as killers, had also sexually assaulted Sarah Harbison.
Wow.
Police never recovered the murder weapons.
So far, it's been confirmed that Sarah and Amy have been sexually assaulted.
No, only Sarah they know of.
Only Sarah.
They are not positive about the other girls being sexually assaulted, but they do know for sure Sarah was.
Interesting.
And I don't know if it's because of the way the bodies and the smoke or what.
And Sarah was also the one that had the 2... Or no, she didn't have the 2 bullets.
No,
2 different...
Amy
did. Okay, that's interesting that Amy was pulled off to the side, had 2 separate bullets, but Sarah was the one that was assaulted.
The reason they think Amy was pulled to the side is they think that she fought them.
Oh, that's so sad. Mm-hmm. Because she was a younger one.
If you listen to the interview from her family, they think that she, which I think they received from the police, that message that she was a fighter and that she fought them. And that's probably maybe why they moved her. Separated her.
Right.
However, the police has never, in any of the interviews I read from the police, have I learned why they think she was separated.
Okay. Did she have any defensive wounds on her? Or will you get into that later?
There is no mention of that, and
Okay.
I think it could be because of the burns. But Amy, I think they could have seen that. They never mentioned that. I don't know how much information the police are keeping.
Okay.
Unknown to us.
Okay, thanks.
After committing the grisly killings, the teens' killers ignited a fire using paper plates, cups, and cardboard from the yogurt shop, which had been soaked in lighter fluid. The inferno, as well as the water from the responding firefighters' hoses in the aftermath of the blaze, destroyed countless clues that could have aided detectives.
Wow. Did they know that was going to happen when they were doing it?
Who?
The fire department.
The fire department didn't even know there were people in there when they first came.
yeah, that's right.
The inferno, as well as the water from responding firefighters' hoses in the aftermath of the blaze, destroyed countless clues that could have aided detectives. The fire had reportedly burnt so hot that it melted the upper rungs of the thick aluminum ladder in the rear of the business. Now, I also heard someone said that not only did the fire burn and they lost evidence from that, they also lost evidence because the sprinklers went on. But I have a hard time believing that there were sprinklers in the shop because it burned everything so bad. And when you have sprinklers, once the heat reaches the sprinklers, they go off. So I don't think there were any sprinklers, even though someone in some interview mentioned that. I really don't think there were sprinklers in the shop.
Right. I thought sprinklers are so powerful that they're going to damage, in the process, of course, saving your life, they're going to damage everything in the home because of how much water
They would have damaged it if they were sprinklers and they had
Right.
gone off. I don't think there were sprinklers. The police in none of their interviews talk about sprinklers. I was just reading all the documentation, and some reporter said that not only the fire, but the sprinklers of the shop and the fire hoses from the firemen destroyed any and all evidence. However, if there had been sprinklers, the fire, by the time the firemen had gone, would have probably turned off most of the fire. And when the fire went there, the fire was still going.
Yeah, I think so too. I just think from what I've learned about sprinklers in the past is that they're pretty powerful, and
The sprinklers should have put the fire out.
unless for some reason there was a malfunction and they never turned on.
That's true.
Yeah, I don't know if they even had sprinklers. I don't know if it was a malfunction. I have no idea. At this point, I don't think it would have saved the girls. They were dead. And if they went on, it still would have destroyed the evidence. I don't see it because even the fireman hoses destroyed evidence. So, just so you know, this was a crime like none in Austin had seen before. The police knew they needed help. And from this scene, they contacted the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, the FBI, and the Texas Department of Public Safety.
Wow. And what made them decide that they needed to do that? Just because of the brutality of it?
Yes. First of all, just from the fire and the way things were done.
Did they think
they
these-
knew that this was a pretty bad scene.
At the time, did they think these were not first-time offenders?
I will read you a comment in a second so you know what they thought.
Okay.
And that's actually, to me, the comment is the most important one, and I'm going to tell you in a second. In the wake of the murders, an unprecedented call for information from the public was launched. Photos of the girls and requests for tips appeared on billboards throughout the city and even on the back of Austin taxi cabs. Now, this comment for me is very important, and I think it actually sums up in a way who did it. And I think the police lost sight of this comment because I think this was what it really says it all. According to one of the original detectives on the case, he said the following: the organized method of operation, ability to control the victims, and destruction of evidence by arson pointed to an adult experienced in crime rather than teenagers.
Yeah, that makes sense. I feel like because of how it does seem like it was a little bit more advanced than just a couple of teenagers.
One of the things that for me told me that this was planned and someone really planned and thought it through and not someone who just decided to do this was that they went in the shop some way or another or had it with them at some point was they had lighter fluid with them.
Oh, wow.
Interesting.
How old were the men that those witnesses who left the shop right before it closed?
They just said young men, but they did not say teenagers.
Okay. So it could be like 20s,
Or 30s.
30s, too.
Because of the ages of the girls, I initially, in my mind, when I was thinking of the kind of, I'm going to assume boys or men who did this, I was thinking of teenagers. But seeing how, unless there were 4, 5, 6 of them, they had to have known how to control them with efficiency, like you said.
Even
True.
if there's 4 or 5 or 6, in addition to controlling, they brought lighter fluid. And the police said because of how they thought it through, I mean, they had them tied up with their clothes. They had them gagged with their clothes.
Right.
I don't know what other information they have not shared with the public. They did not think they were teenagers. And to me, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Because someone thought through that they have to get there. They have to ask to go to the bathroom, either to leave the door unlocked and jammed it unlocked, or to at least go back and check the place out and know where everything is. Teenagers don't really think these through, especially if this is their first or second, even
These people seem more sophisticated than your typical I guess, teenagers that were going to come in. And they seemed like they were ready to light the place on fire. They knew how, they thought this through, which to me sounds like obviously planning, and with planning comes maturity.
Correct. And I also think that they had been there before. I don't know about inside, but outside, checked it out.
Yeah.
They may have been monitoring it. That's my opinion, just because from the way things went down.
They knew where to go and where to leave too.
Right. And they also knew that the day they were going to do that, they have to go in the back and check it out also. So either they went in the back to check out the room so they know how they were going to take this down, or at least to leave the door unlocked.
Right.
The thing is, in none of the articles I read did they say, oh, they had to leave the door unlocked because did they need a key? Usually you don't need a key for those doors in the back. What you need is just push them open. So I don't know why the policemen think that the person who went to the restroom had to do something to leave it open for them.
Did Amy and Sarah usually come to get dropped off by Jennifer, or I guess pick Jennifer up, or was that a completely random occurrence?
No, this was not very common. I don't even know if they ever had done it before.
So if they were as methodical as we're assuming they are, then it seems like Jennifer and Eliza would be their actual targets.
That's true.
It was just a robbery.
A robbery?
Yeah, I really think it was just a robbery. I think because it was a robbery. I think they did steal money from the registers.
I'm just like floored that they would take away so many lives over a robbery.
Just for money is ridiculous.
And then, of course, they raped Sarah. And I mean, likely they raped some of the other girls, if not all of them, too.
I think the girls just happened to be there.
Yeah.
And their goal was, I think, the robbery. And they probably was not a big deal for them to rape them and kill them.
That's just disgusting. They just viewed them as collateral.
But if this is somebody, or if these are people who have experience doing this, then I would think thered be a pattern both previously and continuously in the future.
That's true. People don't just go off and kill a bunch of 4 teenagers for the first time that they've ever committed a crime. I'm going to take a guess and assume that they've done stuff before this.
I agree. Let me just continue as to what happened. At the time of the killings, a known serial killer named Kenneth McDuff was in the area. He had a history of multiple murders involving teenagers, but was soon ruled out. Austin police admit that over 50 people, including McDuff, had confessed to the yogurt shop murders.
How was he ruled out?
I am unaware.
Sometimes they rule people out and then you realize it's just because they have an alibi from a family member, which is not really an alibi.
Well, here's the thing. McDuff was going to be put to death. He was on death row. And I think the night before, the night he was going to put to death is when he confessed. And you see that a lot of these people will confess another murder, so they're not put to death to get them a few extra years to do investigation. You don't know why, but the police knew that it wasn't McDuff. Maybe they had checked him out already, so when he did confess, they already knew he was not the right one.
That's true.
Initial investigations had produced a large number of persons of interest. Among them was a 15-year-old named Maurice Pierce. He was caught with a .22 caliber gun. It's not established to be the murder weapon, okay? In a nearby mall days after the killings. And although he initially gave promising information, after tough questioning, the detectives decided that he was trying to get himself out of a gun charge and eliminated him and his 3 petty criminal friends. His 3 friends were Michael Scott, Robert Springsteen, and Forrest Welborn, whom he had implicated. None of them were older than 17 at the time. So these 4 people were not even 17 at the time. Because one had a gun, he implicated his 3 friends. But when the police went through it, they're like, no, they're not the ones. And remember these 4 people, okay? In the fall of 1992, 2 men wanted for an unrelated kidnapping and sexual assault in Austin were arrested in Mexico. One of the men seen here bore a striking resemblance to someone a witness reported seeing outside the yogurt shop on the night of the murders. So they had a sketch artist draw someone who was sitting outside the yogurt shop that looked like one of these men, okay? So when they questioned by the Austin investigators, the men initially denied any involvement in the yogurt shop murders, but were interrogated by Mexican authorities and they confessed. This was later, after the Austin policemen investigated him. They went down to Mexico, did something, and they were arrested by Mexico police. And the Mexico police interrogated him, and they said, yes, they did it. However, details they gave didn't match the evidence found at the crime scene. And when Austin detectives re-questioned them, the men recanted and said they were forced to give their confessions. Several years later, in 1999, a new detective on the case theorized that the 4 teens from 1991 were credible suspects. Now remember, in 1991, these guys were teens. Not like the original policeman had said that this is someone who's experienced and an adult.
And older.
Right. By that time, they were in their 20s. In a string of interrogations conducted by various detectives, confessions were obtained from some of the suspects. The police said all 4, Robert Springsteen, Michael Scott, Maurice Pierce, and Forrest Wellborn, had participated in the murder. Michael Scott went through a 20-hour interrogation that took place over the course of 4 days. Days later, Robert Springsteen also confessed under questioning. No record of what was said to the men in the 1991 interrogation made it impossible to know whether the detectives had supplied information to the suspects in the initial interrogations. Such information could be used to implicate the suspects in later interrogations if they were to reference it. So they didn't know what they told these young men in 1991. Okay, so now they're being re-asked and they don't even know what they were told in 1991. So if they do tell them something, how do they know it wasn't from the 1991 questioning? While Wellborn and Pierce were initially charged, those charges were eventually dropped due to the lack of evidence, despite Springsteen and Scott later claiming their confessions were coerced. They would eventually both face trial. Springsteen and Scott went to trial entirely due to their self-incriminating statements. That's the only reason they went to trial. The prosecution went into great detail about the horrific nature of the crimes against the young victims, but presented no hard evidence other than the confessions.
They're essentially just going based off of their confessions.
Correct.
Nothing else.
No.
Did you say how old they were when this crime happened?
They were not even 17.
Not even 17. And now we've returned to them at what ages? Or how many years later?
8 years later, so they're adults.
8 years later. Okay.
So they're like 22, 23, somewhere there. Actually, one of them was 15 too at it. They're still young men. The 2 were convicted, Michael Scott being sentenced to life imprisonment in 2002 and Robert Springsteen sentenced to death in 2001. However, the prosecution tactic of using excerpts of each one's alleged confessions at the other's trial was ruled to be violating the confrontation clause because the co-defendant was not testifying. So this is what that means. Springsteen and Scott's confessions were used against each other at their trials, but they weren't allowed to question each other in court. As a result, 5 years after each man was found guilty, their convictions were overturned on the grounds that their constitutional right to confront their accusers had been violated. Did you guys understand that?
I think so, and it makes sense to me. So because they played that recording, they're essentially hearing the other ones speak against themselves, but their attorneys had no opportunity to cross-examine them.
Correct.
I think that's a valid and fair argument.
Yeah, I agree. It's still frustrating, though, for these individuals because there's absolutely no evidence against them, and yet they've been found guilty.
Correct. Both convictions were overturned, and the men were freed in 2009. The prosecution insisted that they would be retried. However, forensic investigation showed that the DNA found in a victim was not theirs, nor was it that of the other 2 implicated in their confessions.
This victim is Sarah?
They don't say. It could be Sarah.
Oh, okay. I'm just curious what sort of DNA evidence they have, whether it's semen or something else.
I think they do have semen in Sarah because they have no other DNA evidence anywhere on these because of the fire.
Right.
Okay, but the DNA evidence when she was raped was saved because it was in her body.
Oh, okay.
But nothing else was. Now, they don't tell us if anyone else was raped or not. They're not officially saying anything.
Okay.
There is a good possibility that one of the other girls was. They're just not releasing that
Yeah, they're
information.
keeping things quiet.
Right. So one of the DNA that they found in the victim did say that none of these 4 men were there. Or what it did say is they did not rape the victims.
Wow. Why didn't they just test that in the beginning if they had the DNA all along?
You need to understand, it's still early in DNA. And even with what they have, this DNA testing still is not accurate enough to help them find the individuals
I see.
or the individual.
Okay.
Let me explain more about this.
Really quick, this all started just because they were found with the same gun.
A gun, yeah. Which is a teenager with a gun.
It was the same gun, but their ballistics, like, obviously was not advanced enough to be able to confirm.
The ballistics, it wasn't advanced enough. The bullets were damaged in the fire. They could not get anything out of the bullet.
What I'm saying is the ballistics weren't advanced enough for them to tell if the gun that kid had was the gun used.
Actually, they did have the answer to that. Let me just keep going.
Okay.
So the prosecution consequently abandoned plans for a retrial and the charges were dismissed. Texas courts, however, later decided that those released were not entitled to compensation as they had not proven they did not commit the crime.
Wow.
This is just ridiculous.
But what do they need to be found innocent or not guilty in a court of law to prove that they haven't done the crime?
I don't know. I do know, even though the DNA testing they did is not as advanced as other tests, the DNA testing does for sure eliminate them as raping the girls or one of the girls. It does not eliminate them for not being there.
Technically, all the evidence says is they didn't rape the girl, not that they weren't there.
Right.
Yeah.
If you listen to some of the family, they still think these 4 guys were there.
Interesting.
And they think maybe it was another person that raped the girls. But let's be realistic. These people even confessed being there. If they confessed they were there, they would have confessed the 5th person then. And the police are forgetting what the initial investigator said. This is something an adult would have done, not teenagers. However, because the police had no suspects, I think they just decided to grasp on the young guys and go with it.
Yeah, it was a high-profile case, and so they probably had a lot of pressure to find someone, arrest them, and just close this case.
Yes, I think there was a lot of pressure into this. I do think, though, that no matter how much pressure you have to get the right person.
100%, yeah.
One of the detectives in the interrogations with the 4 guys was Hector Polanco, and he had been accused of coercing false confessions in a previous notorious case involving exonerated defendants Christopher Ochoa and Richard Denziger. Both were released after 13 years in prison, and Denziger was assaulted in prison, which resulted in permanent brain damage.
Jeez.
Wow.
So now they know that one of the detectives is good at getting false confessions. Now there's more to this. In addition, there was another problem with the case. A detective had held a gun to Scott's head during his pivotal multi-day interrogation.
What?
Yes, and another detective admitted to withholding key information for more than a year that all but ruled out Pierce's gun as the murder weapon. So, one, they took a gun to Scott's head, so no wonder he gave them a confession.
Yeah.
And the other is they knew that Pierce's gun was not even the murder weapon.
This is just ridiculous.
It's a case where they had no one and they just try to create a story and
I mean,
put people in
there's
jail.
It's a gross injustice.
Yeah, I mean, there's one thing to just make a mistake or be and just not know what you were doing, but they completely knew, and they were continuing to push this narrative on these innocent teens just so that they can make themselves look better.
So the investigators also dredged the Colorado River looking for another gun supposedly dumped there almost a decade earlier, but they didn't find it. 7 of the jurors from the trials have stated that they would not have convicted Scott and Springsteen had this evidence been available at the time. If they knew about the gun, if they knew about the coercion, if they knew how they did all this. So they would not even have put these guys on trial or said they were guilty. Now, in 2008, this is about the DNA, a new type of DNA testing, Y-STR, revealed that none of the 4 men originally arrested for this crime were a match for the DNA found at the crime scene. Scott and Springsteen were released on bond in June of 2009, and their charges were dismissed. Now, originally, that DNA sample from the crime scene was not a complete DNA profile, and I do not know why, and I do not know what's the reason behind this. So it was just a Y-STR. That is the male portion of the DNA. So they only tested the male portion of the DNA.
So only the Y
Correct.
Okay, only the Y.
One of the reasons was because the DNAs were mixed together. Let's just say it was Sarah's DNA and this. Nowadays, I know they can pull that apart.
Right.
I don't know where they are with that. But anyways, and it was not a very detailed sample, having just 16 markers. So on the Y chromosome, they only had 16 markers. 16 STRs, which is the markers, is not a very powerful match. And there could be millions of people with the same profile.
Oh, wow.
Yet, it eliminated the 4 guys.
Oh, wow.
Okay?
That's incredible.
So in genetic genealogy, they usually use 67 or 111 markers, or maybe even more.
Oh, wait, how many?
67 to 111 markers.
Oh, okay.
And maybe even more. Years later, with more advanced DNA testing, they were able to identify 25 markers.
Wow.
Okay. Austin Police Department has DNA from an unknown male as a result of the rapes. And now don't forget they're at 25 markers. A Y chromosome match for the perpetrator DNA had been found in a research database of the FBI, but the FBI has declined to reveal the identity of the man by law of anonymity for donors, and because thousands of men could bear this fragment of DNA, which is unable to identify individuals. So because the 25 markers is not enough, just because the police department found an individual that matches on the FBI database, it is not enough to say it is this person.
Okay.
I understand that, but I'm also like, how many are these people going to be showing up in the FBI database if they're not doing something funky?
They're not.
Right.
The new profile contained results from a total of 25, like I said, Y-STR markers. In addition to the original 16 markers analyzed, this profile contained 9 new Y chromosome markers. In other words, this was a more detailed version of Austin's Police Department's original Y-STR profile queried against the U.S. Y-STR database. So this is more detailed, however, it's still not enough. The FBI understood that and told them, this does not mean this man is guilty.
Okay, I see what's going on. So it's just not enough.
It's not enough. With DNA research advancing, investigators hope there will be a match that solves the case. Y-STR is a tool that can eliminate almost everyone. It should eliminate everybody but the suspect. Because of where the DNA was found, if the Y-STR does not match, they can be eliminated as suspects. Because this DNA was found inside one of the suspects, they know for sure that it is the individual who was there.
Right.
If they have found it maybe on a cabinet or something,
Right.
it couldn't be proven. But because everything else was destroyed and they found that inside one of the victims, they know for sure that if they can match it, they know that it is one of the suspects.
Which is good for them if they do ever find the link.
I think they should do some detailed DNA testing now because they are able
Like
to
genealogical, you're saying?
do more. Yes, they can do it. I'm almost positive they could do more.
I think they just have to decide to pay for it, because that's why a lot of them haven't been done, is what I've heard, is that it's expensive for police departments to do it. And so a lot of times they don't do it for that reason.
And it's time consuming.
Time consuming doesn't matter. They have time. They've been sitting on this for so many years.
Oh, I mean, for this case, yeah. I was talking about, I know like for older cases, I've heard that sometimes that's why they may not do
And now,
genealogy.
I think it's more about the financial aspect of it than the time.
I think the time is what makes it so financially expensive. That's what I was trying to say.
You guys do know that this is over 30 years old now.
Yeah.
A side note, on December 23, 2010, Austin police officer Frank Wilson and his rookie partner Bradley Smith conducted a traffic stop on a vehicle driven by Maurice Pierce. Do you guys remember Maurice? He was the gentleman who had the original gun that when he was young.
Yeah.
Okay. In the northern part of the city. After a brief foot pursuit, Pierce struggled with Wilson, which is one of the policemen, before removing a knife from his belt and stabbing Wilson in the neck.
Oh my God.
Wilson, who survived his injuries, subsequently pulled out his gun and shot and killed Pierce.
Wow.
I think Pierce at this point was so damaged that he was afraid of the police.
Yeah.
I really do think that's what happened.
Oh, that's so sad.
Because it was only a traffic stop. So on August 3 of 2022, President Joe Biden signed the Homicide Victims Family Rights Act into law, which was motivated by the yogurt shop murders. The law is intended to help ensure the federal law enforcement reviews cold case files and applies the latest technologies and investigative standards. The logistics are not clear in the bill. However, it states that a request can be made for a cold case review by federal agencies.
Oh, that's nice.
This is where we stand with this unsolved case, actually.
I wonder how much law enforcement is going to follow that law and get all these code cases up to date with the latest technology as much as possible.
The police department asked for assistance early on, and they did ask the FBI to help them with the DNA, whether or not this person was a suspect. I am assuming they know they can ask for more help.
It's just crazy to me that this type of crime, as horrific, heinous, and how public it was, that it still has gone unsolved this long.
It's because all the evidence was burned and destroyed by the fire and the water. Now, as far as the families, they were devastated. Jennifer's and Sarah's mom lost her children completely because there were two siblings.
It's just awful.
Oh my God.
And it was very, very tragic and painful for the families.
And they didn't have any other siblings, Jennifer and Sarah?
Oh God, that's terrible.
The families are hoping maybe with DNA they can get an answer.
I feel pretty optimistic about this cold case because they have a pretty good, clear DNA sample. They just have to find someone that matches it.
Correct, but I think it's going to have to be, if it's not someone in the database, I think it's going to have to be more genetics, genealogy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree.
Which actually does cost probably a little bit more than just a test to see compare DNAs.
Because I don't think it's done through the police or anything like that. I think it's done through a third party, right? For genealogy?
Yes, it's done by a third party.
Exactly.
The other thing is these individuals, if they were in their 20s or 30s, they're older men at this point, if they are even alive.
A lot of times, because of all the latest technology, we're seeing all these old men put into prison because of the crimes they committed when they were young. Given how brutal this case is, it's very haunting that it still hasn't been solved.
You would hope that a case like this would have gotten solved, but...
This one really bothered me when I was young because these girls didn't do anything wrong. They were just at work. They closed their shop. They were going to go home. There's a few more stories like that. I probably will cover them because they really made me stop and think. I just don't understand. I mean, if they wanted the money, why didn't they just go in, ask for the money, and leave?
Right? Why do you have to just torture them and then On top of it all, take their lives away.
I think I know the answer to that because they have done this before and maybe had been arrested before.
Oh, yeah.
So there was, if I'm going to do this again, I'm going to make sure no one finds out it's me.
They could have worn masks, though. You know what I'm saying? And
well, still, you risk leaving a witness, and then
I guess your DNA.
Yeah, and then obviously they can call the police right away, so you don't have enough time to leave.
I think they've done this before.
Yeah.
I think they learned from their mistakes and they didn't want to get caught this time. I don't know why they thought the yogurt shop is going to have so much money for them, though.
Yeah. Or just wait until they leave and then break in.
There's an alarm probably, so that's why.
Yeah, I would agree, but it seems like they are making things more difficult for themselves by killing 4 innocent people who've had like absolutely nothing to do with this.
At this point, that proves to me they didn't care.
Oh yeah, I would agree.
Okay,
on that, yeah.
That whatever their motive is, whether it's for them to rob and get money, they didn't care about the individual.
Unless their motive was essentially rob and rape, which in that case they would have
both
to be
of their motives
right.
together.
Yeah, it could be.
Also, if this has been a pattern, why haven't we seen, or at least the police seen, continued occurrences of these sorts of murders, arsons, etc. happening?
The yogurt shop it got way too big publicly, and then they realized they couldn't do it again. Unless they are doing it, but they're doing it in like different ways. Like maybe they're doing it at a gas station.
The FBI would be able to see a pattern, whether it's in Texas or across the country.
That's true.
Maybe it got too heated. Like the
Too
FBI
big.
got involved and
Yeah.
other agencies got involved.
Yeah.
They may not have expected the results they got. Like,
yeah. If it got too big, then maybe they had to change how they did things. Instead of their motive being rob and rape, maybe they had to split those two motives and deal with them separately, like rob a gas station and not kill anyone, and then maybe do something else to solve their other sick fantasies. So maybe they had to adjust the way that they did things or go under based on how much heat that they were getting from this.
Now, here's another idea. Maybe they have been arrested. They did something else. And they have been arrested or in jail, but they can't identify them because there's not enough markers.
Oh, that's true.
Don't forget, someone was identified in the DNA of the FBI. FBI said there's not enough information.
And it could be that the person may already be in prison.
We don't know because we just don't know if they continued this. However, if they were adults and have done this before and thought it through, they also know if they have to stop. They should also know when to stop.
They might have found other ways to like relieve their sick fantasies, and because they are adults, they're mature enough to realize, okay, this isn't working. There's too much heat on me. I need to stop and figure out another way to do this.
Unless it wasn't an impulse, and specifically the robbery. In the robbery, if it wasn't an impulse, I think it would have been easier to remove the robbery. But also, I've definitely heard cases of men killing and raping women in, say, their 20s and 30s, and then they get married, and then they refrain from that, and it comes back to bite them in
The thing is, we don't know. There's a lot of speculations we could do, but we have no idea who they are, why they did it, and whether they stopped or not. They could have been arrested. Maybe they did stop. To me, listening to the story, it's not impulsive. They planned it because they were probably sitting out there watching, seeing how they work. They went in for yogurt. They didn't leave when they knew the store was closing. They went back to the bathroom and they had lighter fluid. So to me, it was not an impulsive decision. I would be really surprised if and when they arrest them that they say it was impulsive. They just decided to do it.
Yeah, I feel like this to me sounds like it was planned.
It was somewhat planned. You don't
to some degree, yeah.
Do you carry lighter fluid with you the whole time? No. Or gasoline? No.
I mean, you could carry a lighter, but not lighter fluid.
I think they planned it.
It's even sadder because Amy and Sarah didn't necessarily have to be there. They just came that time. And if it had been any other night, they may not have been involved.
Correct.
True.
So, any more comments, anybody?
And I hope one day that they're able to figure out and get a DNA match.
I'm hoping the same thing. Okay, I want to thank you for listening to us this week. We love our listeners. And because of you, we do this podcast. Your help and engagement really helps the podcast grow. If you enjoyed this episode, please text a friend and family member to listen to our podcasts. Until next time, make sure you stay on the eerie side. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, guys. Thank you.
Be safe.